Welcome everybody to Sustainable River Basin Management, Module 3 and Part 3. This time I want to talk to you about urbanization and demography as part of the challenges of the water sector. Let's first look into urban population and urbanization. There's a new term that you increasingly hear, which is the term megacities. And what is considered as a megacity by UN definition is a consistent, connected urban area where we have more than 10 million residents living. The largest urban growth is projected to take place in India, China and Nigeria in the next years. Those three countries will account for about 37% of the projected growth of the global urban population between 2014 and the year 2050. And by the year 2050, it is projected that India alone will add about 404 million urban dwellers to the statistics. Now, those are years which many of us will reach. This is part of our lifetime now. It's not part of future generations. And in that context, we also should see the next discussions. The map here shows, which comes from the revision of World Urbanization Prospects produced by UNDESA in 2014. And this shows us the percentage of urban agglomerations with at least 500,000 inhabitants in the year 2014. So it's a up-to-date image of our current situation. And what we can see is that we have major concentrations of urban agglomerations in this region. Also, India is one of the major concentration points, and Europe. And then we have a few hotspots, so to say, on some of the continents like Latin America and Africa, which will play a major role in economic growth, also in the environmental impacts and the water needs and demands accordingly. Now, let's reflect on urban areas and the hydrology. This is what interests us. So what we most know living in cities is that we get water when we open our taps, or that we get water when we go to our community tap or to our kiosks, or when we are delivered water through a lorry or a tanker system, which comes every other day. We get water, or we may get water in a can system or in bottled system. So this is what we know from an urban area, depending on the situation, depending on some of the factors. But what we easily forget is that the water is primarily supplied by the hydrology and the ecosystem's function of a natural catchment that surrounds the cities. And this is what we need to emphasize, and that's why we are talking about urbanization also for when we generally talk about sustainable river basin management. So those cities are residing within such catchments, and as such cannot be managed out of sight of the functioning of the hydrological processes in these catchments. Now, urban growth has been quite a challenge on its own in terms of planning of infrastructure. A typical situation is shown here. This is a picture of Mumbai, where we have an urban center which was probably planned some years ago and then built up, and probably most of these buildings are properly connected to the urban service utilities, such as water, such as maybe warm water heating systems, connected to proper sewage systems as planned years, maybe in the 1940s or so. And then we have a major part which has been growing completely outside this planned scheme. Very often, this is just an example here, where small houses, maybe squatters pop up, which then successively change into proper houses or even proper construction, high-rise buildings in an organic way, and are not connected to utilities, are only connected through a few main lines, the roads that may have been driven through these organically growing settlements, and the rest of it is helping yourself service systems and maybe community-based solutions. So very often this is what we see, not just in the so-called developing countries, but even in developed countries, this is sometimes happening in the very same way. And we have situations very often that an urban center that was planned, as mentioned here already, simply swallows villages, rural areas. It increases the area of the urbanized location expands, it grows and builds in old villages. So in many cases we have cities which consist of many villages, of old cores, which eventually have grown into one organic area, which we call today a city, a mega city, or a large city. This is an example from Korea. Now, another example that shows us how this urban expansion is taking place at a very rapid pace is here from Bangalore in India. We have a land use change map here using satellite images. You can get more detail and also the data from the site here. The red colors show us built-up areas. Those are the so-called urbanized areas. We have the green color here, which indicates vegetation, can be agriculture, could be forest. We have blue, which shows us water bodies, and then we have some others, which could be industrial zones or degraded land in some other, not in other categories here. Now what we see is that this began in the 1973 as a very small spot, several urban areas here, many small villages, and then out of a sudden it exploded to this level that we see in 1992, where this has become a large connected area with some lines already growing into the neighborhoods, which at this point are either degraded and maybe land under construction, or still green areas, which are maybe agricultural fields. And we have the blue, the water bodies, which have now in the past were sitting far apart from the urban centers, have now become the fringes or the outskirts or peri-urban areas of this growing city. And this then pattern continues, swallowing the rural areas and incorporating the water bodies into the city boundaries of the example of Bangalore. So we can see similar patterns in most of these urban aggregations, and we can also use this in a way to predict what growth patterns. Now let's look into water. This is what is our subject, and one critical topic to this is the land use transformation, which very often goes under the category of value addition. This is when water supply infrastructure, water reservoirs, lakes are knowingly converted into some other public urban infrastructure. So where water has been sort of categorized as something that doesn't serve any purpose and is rather a dump site or a polluted water system, a mosquito breeding ground, and for that reason there could be a value addition be implemented by constructing something else on top of this. And again, from the example in that same website that I mentioned before of Bangalore, we see that, for instance, these major tanks are lakes, man-made lakes for the purpose of rainwater harvesting or for the purpose of groundwater recharge in the past, were now transformed into infrastructures which serve an important purpose, but whether this is a better purpose than for water supply is the question that I want to leave with you. In this case, it has become a city bus stand or a golf course or a sports complex, a sports stadium. So all of those are important infrastructures in an urban environment. However, this has gone at the expense of water infrastructures which could relieve water scarcity situations and water availability in urban areas. So we need to keep this in mind in our sustainability assessments and how we recommend when we are in the position how urban development should take place, taking into account water resources. Now let's look into the relationship of the cities and the rural areas or the countryside. We've looked at this picture which showed us the swallowing of villages and also how cities just organically grow into these rural areas. This picture here shows us the city here and the countryside here, how typically both contrast quite a bit. And then we have, so to say, the natural components, the people, the food on one chain, which shows a one-directional flow from the rural areas to the city. And we also see the one-directional flow of the garbage, the waste, pollution, migrants or retired people moving back into the countrysides. And then we have on the other side a stream, a flow of taking place between those two compartments in terms of a virtual flow of money and ideas, which again are very much one-directional from the countryside to a city. And in terms of aid, investment aid, or in terms of new ideas of media or cultural or urbanization of the countryside, which is often going along with a loss of tradition and a loss of social structures in rural areas from the cities again back into the countryside. Now, we can also see this as in two other ways, as a zone of direct impact, which means experiences the immediate effects of the urban-rural interface in terms of pollution, waste disposal, and in terms of a market-related zone of influence, which is more in terms of trade of food, production, demand-oriented. So those are the typical relationships that we see nowadays. Now let's just reflect on water and land and living resources, how this progresses. So and in which stage a certain area might be when we start working in a certain catchment which is urbanized. So the initial state, we would say, is a rural setting where we have a groundwater table, we have recharge taking place immediately in the vicinity of where we are also abstracting our water from a shallow region or from a surface water body. And we have a few settlements here, and most of this has been agriculture or forestry. And this setting changes into a growing urbanized area. And this also means that water demand is increasing, and with the usages taking place, the services or activities taking place in this urbanized area, contamination is taking place, still recharge is taking place at a lower pace, but not of good quality water, but of contaminated water. And our groundwater may not be available anymore because of that contamination. It may also not be available anymore because we have been abstracting so much to satisfy our needs, and the water table may have dropped quite substantially. That is the second stage. And the third stage that we usually see is that this is transforming into a city. There is almost no natural recharge taking place anymore. There is recharge taking place from stormwater drainage, from sewer systems into this underground underneath the buildings, the urban infrastructure. This groundwater aquifer system had to be abandoned because the water table is too deep by now, or the water has been too contaminated by now, and we had to set up our water abstraction systems on the fringes, outside in the rural areas, outside the city boundaries, and had to create our piped systems, which may be several kilometers, several hundreds of kilometers away, distant from our city. And then this goes on like this and may be flexible enough to accommodate more buildings along these distances here, but eventually also these areas will be converted into urban spaces, into parts of the city, and that the same problems will have reached here. And then we are at a stage where we probably can call this a mega city, and where the long distance water supply is not working anymore. It's not economic, or simply not existing, not available, because more such growing urban centers exist in our catchment. So there may be no distance from where we can take the water to supply just one megacity from. So, and this takes us to the real crisis management that we can also observe in many of these large urban agglomerates. What is obvious here is already that this is not easily be transformed or built back into an earlier situation. This is virtually impossible, but some things can happen, and this is what we need to investigate more. Now let's talk more about concepts to see where we can start changing something. One of the concepts that comes from the 1950s and has developed from there, I just give this as your reference. You can take more recent literature on this, but it comes down to a concept of a parasitic nature of cities, and you know what a parasite is. What we mean by a parasitic city is that it produces negative effects. It's a siphoning of economic resources for the enrichment of so-called privileged urban classes who do not render a real productive service in return from using those resources. And those parasitic cities have their wealth squandered by non-working or all-consuming elites. So we have cities which draw the resources from their neighborhood, from the rural areas, which have to be fed by the farmers because food and so on, the primary sources of our food is not produced in the cities. So those people all may contribute in terms of employment to some services to the economy, but in itself they are not producing their food or also not contributing to solving the waste removal issues. The other extreme of this, parasitic is obviously a very extreme, but the other extreme on the positive axis of this concept would be a generative or symbiotic city. Also this comes from, as the term parasitic, symbiotic also comes from the biology background, and in this case it is to say that there's a favorable impact on economic growth generated by such a city. Such a city would reallocate the bulk of its surplus and accumulated wealth. It would also return wealth as in the form of investments, which would benefit the production and would benefit people, would benefit public infrastructures and human capital. So those are the two extremes, and we can see such extreme cities, but we can also see a lot of many transitions. And this is where we have to work on. Now, what is also a concept very often used, especially in developing countries, is to see urban centers, urbanized areas as so-called engines of growth, which for that reason are like magnets, like very highly attractive regions for and generate urban migration. But by the very nature of our economic growth and our current economic models, such cities of economic growth are parasitic in nature, as we have just described in the extreme form. So the result and the response to this model engine of growth is poverty and environmental degradation. It leads to the encroachment of valuable agricultural land. Many of the countries don't have enough agricultural land left to be able to produce enough food for its population. It's increasing the use of or facilitating or inviting the increase of private cars, increase in energy consumption. It often also leads to the deterioration of the core city centers, the decline of the cities, because most of life takes place in the fringes. It's more dynamic and maybe better served in many cases. There might be no way out to take the garbage out of the core city center, for instance. the service lines may not reach the city centers to accommodate the changes or the amount of people and goods that have to move in and out of the inner parts of the city, which leads to a decline. And we may have, as a response, the underutilization of the existing built environment. So the result is that the cities expand, grow into these agricultural areas, whereas the housing density could have been improved or increased without compromising on the quality of the urban service provision. Now, what is important to keep in mind is that the impacts of urbanization on environmental sustainability are of global significance. And this is because of what we call a cumulative effect. So all of the small effects that appear small in itself, each pollution, each part of addition of cars or new garbage sites or change in lifestyles accumulate to a level where it becomes irreversible and has its global impact. How do we usually start with water supply? We can get water from a local reservoir. It could be a dam or a lake. We can get water from our groundwater resources. We could go for riverbed infiltration, or we could go for large dams, which could be built inside our catchment boundaries, in which, for instance, an urban area or a water demand area is located. This all would be our usual starting points under normal water supply, water demand conditions. Now, it becomes critical when we get to a point where we have to opt for interbasin transfers, where we take water from a donor basin to a receiving basin, and by doing so we increase the stress in that donor basin. It becomes increasingly critical when we have to move on to private groundwater abstraction, for instance inside urban areas as a do-it-yourself solution, and it becomes increasingly difficult when we have to opt for groundwater abstraction and purchases from the peri-urban or rural areas to supply a demand area. And on the last end of this scale, from excellent conditions to very difficult or crisis conditions, appear our bottled or canned water and our desalination water and our 100% zero discharge approaches. Now, this has been only looking into water supply in terms of quantities. What has been left out here in this part is the water quality component, which puts in additional stress and conditions onto our water supply options. Now let's look into the other side of the water cycle, from our water supply to our wastewater management, to our today's sewage water treatment solutions, which I am also calling on a crisis path. You see that we either don't have treatment at all. We may have water, again, as a medium to dilute our sewage to levels that may be released into the environment, or we are using water to convey our sewage from one location to another location to release it untreated into our environment. That is obviously not the best solution, but it's in many areas, in many rural areas especially, the only solution right now. The second is a conventional central sewage disposal method, like the watering canalization, which is very widely used still in industrial countries, industrial states. it's also not an excellent solution to our water sewage treatment necessities. And the third is a multi-stage sewage treatment plant, which in itself has very high requirements on water. It consumes a lot of water to operate, and it requires high investments and technological solutions. So in itself, they add to the water crisis situation. And then we have partial treatment, which usually coupled to the sale to an industry, which means that we treat water to a level to where it is useful or becomes useful again to certain industries, for instance, construction or agriculture usages. This is not really a solution again, because it externalizes costs. It transfers the need of treating the water again to some other user, an industry in this case. Now, as I'm not able to show you here the best way. It's obviously a field of research, and when you are still searching for your professional priorities, you may actually consider one of these as your field of future research. Now, let's come to the conclusions. The development successes or failures of societies and also of states are determined by the ability to provide safe, reliable water, and this especially for megacities. There is no best practice solution for water provision, especially at those scales of the large urban clusters. There's a lot happening right now in terms of smart city concepts or smart grid solutions, but there is no such solution at hand right now. A lot of this will be happening in the Asian region. That's because large urban agglomerates are located there. And what we can summarize is that our old model of urban utility in terms of water and wastewater treatment in one location and moving water passively through an established network to the user and from the user is impossible. It's impossible to manage efficiently in such large cities at such unprecedented scale, and the complexity of the users, the water pollution, types of pollution levels. So at this point, I want to stop this module, and I see you next time again.